The sound of the organ reverberated through the stillness of an ancient church on a Sunday morning. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting shimmering bands of blue and red light across the cold stone floor. People came here to pray, to find a bit of peace. But for Henry Carter, an elegant and powerful 55-year-old senator, it stirred up a deep sense of loss, the grave of his wife, and that of his only son, Richard Carter. He walked slowly along the gravel-laid aisle, his usual dignified bearing now cloaked in a quiet sadness. Then, a sight stopped him cold. Right beside his son's gravestone, a young black woman in a simple nurse's uniform was kneeling and sobbing. Next to her stood a little girl of about 6, clutching a worn fabric doll, her eyes wet yet shining in an extraordinary way. Henry frowned, anger rising within him. To him, this was Carter family's sacred place, and no one was allowed to intrude. His voice trembled with fury as he shouted, "Who are you to dare to kneel and cry at my son's grave?" The woman lifted her head, her eyes red but steadfast. She gently held her daughter's hand, then spoke in a trembling but courageous voice. "My name is Aaliyah Johnson, and this is my daughter, Richard's daughter." Time seemed to stand still. Henry took a step back, his gaze instinctively drawn to the little girl's face. Those eyes, clear and radiant, were the very spitting image of Richard, the son he had lost 5 years ago. Her name is Aaliyah Johnson. At 27, Aaliyah had endured more losses than one might in a lifetime. Her parents died early in a car accident, leaving her alone in a poor neighborhood in the southern part of the city. From then on, Aaliyah had to both study and work just to survive. She became a nurse, a demanding job, but it gave her belief that even in poverty she could save lives. She could still sow hope for those in pain. But after Richard's sudden death, the man she loved, and the father of her young daughter, Aaliyah's life turned into an unending struggle. She raised Grace alone, the 6-year-old girl, working night shifts at the hospital while also taking extra work at a community clinic to afford their rent and to buy books for her daughter. Grace was innocent and bright. She often carried around her old, tattered doll. It was the last gift Richard had given her before he passed away. To Aaliyah, Grace was not only her child, but also living proof of a love that had transcended racial boundaries but had been buried by prejudice and the cruelty of fate. On the other hand, Henry Carter was the complete opposite, a powerful white senator. He had appeared many times on television delivering speeches about preserving family tradition. He took pride in the Carter name as a symbol of elite heritage, viewing it as an inviolable legacy. After his wife died from a serious illness and his son Richard perished in an accident, Henry became increasingly closed off and bitter. In his eyes, what remained of the family was only political reputation and an immaculate grave free from any stain. And now, before Henry's eyes, a truth emerged that infuriated him. A black child purported to be his biological grandson. He saw it as an affront. Meanwhile, Aaliyah only hoped that Grace would be recognized, not for money or power, but so that her daughter could grow up protected, not disdained, not robbed of her future because of her skin color. That conflict between a senator who believed that pure-blood heritage meant everything, and a single mother who simply wanted to preserve a small happiness for her child, is the ember quietly burning, ready to ignite. At first glance, Aaliyah looked like just another young nurse. Plain clothes, a slender frame worn thin by long shifts. But behind that quiet exterior, she carried a strength no one could have imagined. For years, after Grace had fallen asleep, Aaliyah attended night classes at the local community law school. She studied case files, legal codes, and court rulings with one goal in mind. If the day ever came when someone tried to take her daughter away, she would have the knowledge to stand and fight. Those long, exhausting nights had forged in Aaliyah a steel-hard resilience. And beyond that, she had secretly gathered evidence, tracing the roots of political corruption and shady financial dealings across 10 years of Henry Carter's career. The more she uncovered, the more shocked she became. The man who stood at podiums preaching morality was, behind closed doors, accepting bribes from pharmaceutical corporations and signing deals that left thousands of working-class families devastated. Aaliyah was not alone. She had connected with nonprofit organizations, civil rights attorneys, and most notably, a white journalist who had once been silenced by Henry, forced to give up his career. Together, they quietly prepared for the day the truth would come to light. The first confrontation took place in the senator's office. Henry sat coldly across from Aaliyah and laid a check in front of her. An amount large enough to shake anyone's resolve. He spoke slowly, as if granting her a favor. "Give me the child to raise. In return, you will never have to worry about anything again." The room hung heavy with tension, but Aaliyah did not hesitate. She picked up the check, locked eyes with Henry, and tore it in half. The pieces drifted gently to the floor. "You cannot buy a mother's love. You already lost one child to ambition. You will not take this one." In that moment, for the first time in his life, Henry Carter, a man cloaked in power, felt a force stronger than money or politics, a mother's love. Henry Carter was not used to being challenged. His entire political career had been built on power, fear, and empty promises. And now, a black nurse dared to stand against him. He saw it as nothing short of an insult. He retaliated immediately. His favored media outlets unleashed a storm of stories, painting Aaliyah as a manipulative woman who seduced Richard for a better life, calling her an irresponsible single mother, even hinting that Grace was the result of a fleeting affair. The malicious headlines spread quickly, turning many in the community against her. But Aaliyah did not crumble. On the contrary, she struck back with the years of preparation she had carefully built. One morning, just as Henry stepped into a press briefing, every major news outlet released a bombshell. Documents showing he had received millions of dollars in bribes from pharmaceutical giants, signed legislation that drove up drug prices, and plunged thousands of poor patients into despair. Accompanying the reports were photos and audio recordings that Aaliyah and her allies had gathered. The once silenced journalist returned, this time as a force to be reckoned with. He published a series of investigations, breaking down every shady contract and transaction. The public reaction was explosive. People poured into the streets in outrage. Opposition senators called for a federal investigation. But it did not stop there. The civil rights legal group Aaliyah had partnered with filed a lawsuit against Henry for racial discrimination and attempting to unlawfully strip a mother of custody. For the first time, a seemingly untouchable senator was forced to face both the law and the judgment of the public. The climax came in court. Henry walked in backed by a team of elite attorneys. He believed his money and influence would shield him, as they always had. But across the aisle sat Aaliyah, the slender young woman, calm and upright, her eyes fierce with resolve, flanked by a passionate legal team. The courtroom erupted in heated argument. Henry's lawyers tried to paint Aaliyah as a gold digger, but every accusation was countered with solid evidence she had prepared. When the recordings of Henry accepting bribes played for the court, a hush fell over the room. Henry sat frozen, sweat forming on his brow. For the first time, he felt the foundations of his power begin to crack. And in the audience, Grace sat beside a volunteer, clutching her old doll. Her eyes sparkled, watching her mother speak, like the child understood that today, it was not just her future on the line, but the truth itself that was finally coming to light. On the final day of the trial, the courtroom was packed, the air was heavy, and every pair of eyes was fixed on Henry Carter, the man who once walked like a political cane, now seated on the defendant's bench. Prosecutors laid out one irrefutable piece of evidence after another: bank transaction records, shady contracts, recordings of secret conversations. Henry tried to deny the charges, but his voice trembled. The same hands that once slammed tables with authority now clenched in silent desperation. Then, Aaliyah rose to speak. Her voice was calm but rang loud and clear through the courtroom. Richard never wanted his daughter to grow up in lies. Before he passed away, he wrote a handwritten will. In it, Richard gave me full custody of Grace and entrusted me with confidential documents exposing the crimes of his own father. The courtroom gasped. Henry's attorneys were stunned, and the senator himself turned pale. Pages written in Richard's messy handwriting were presented to the court, evidence both legally binding and emotionally powerful. The truth struck like a final blow. Henry not only lost the chance to salvage his career, but was now officially charged with corruption, money laundering, and abuse of power. When the verdict was read, Law enforcement officers approached and handcuffed Henry Carter right there in court. Murmurs swept through the public gallery. Once a man at the peak of political influence, he now bowed his head and walked out like a criminal. Meanwhile, Grace was officially recognized by the court as the legal daughter of Richard Carter. Protected not just by law, but by a supportive and watchful community, the little girl looked up at her mother and smiled. At that moment, Aaliyah pulled her daughter into her arms. There was no greater victory. Not money, not fame, but justice and the right to be loved as a human being. 2 years after that explosive trial, life had changed. Aaliyah Johnson, once a single nurse smeared across headlines, had now become a civil rights attorney. She stood in front of community classrooms, teaching young people about justice, about how the law can protect the vulnerable. If we dared to speak up, her eyes no longer carried exhaustion, but glowed with conviction. And Grace, the little girl who once clung to an old doll in a courtroom, had earned a scholarship to a prestigious school. In her small backpack, she still kept her father's last gift, as a quiet reminder that love never disappears. It only changes form and keeps on living. Elsewhere, in a cold prison cell, Henry Carter received letters from the outside. One afternoon, he opened an envelope and read the innocent handwriting of Grace. "I still hope you know that family is not about blood. It is about how we love one another." For the first time in years, Henry sat in silence for hours, tears falling onto the page. This story leaves behind a lesson. Money and power may manipulate the law for a while, but truth and love always win in the end. If you have ever been looked down upon because of where you come from or the color of your skin, share your story in the comments below. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more stories about justice, love, and the strength to rise above prejudice.